She was a 7-year-old girl stumbling through a blizzard 15 miles from nowhere, and the mountain man who found her half frozen in the snow had no idea she was running from people who would kill to find what was hidden beneath his cabin floor. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind didn't howl that night. It screamed. Jackson Cole stood at the window of his cabin, watching the storm tear through the Colorado Rockies like something ancient and furious. Snow came sideways, thick as a curtain, blotting out the pines that stood just 30 feet from his door. The glass rattled in its frame. The logs groaned. He'd seen bad weather before, spent 23 years in search and rescue before he walked away from it all. But this storm felt different, meaner, like it had come looking for something. He turned from the window and walked back to the wood stove, adding another split log to the fire. The cabin was small, just one main room with a loft, a kitchen tucked in the corner, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it was his. No neighbors, no noise, no memories he couldn't control, just silence, solitude, and the kind of peace that only came from being forgotten. Jackson was 47 now, though his hands looked older. Scarred knuckles, calluses thick as leather, fingers that had pulled people from avalanches and cliff faces, from wrecked cars and frozen rivers. He'd saved 32 lives in his career. He remembered every single one, but he also remembered the ones he didn't save, and those were the ones that made him leave. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the old percolator on the stove, black and bitter, the way he liked it. Outside, the storm intensified. The weather report that morning had said it would pass by evening. That was 6 hours ago. Now it looked like the kind of storm that buried entire valleys and didn't apologize. Jackson moved to the corner where his radio sat, an old shortwave unit he kept for emergencies. He turned the dial, listening to the static crackle and hiss. A voice broke through, faint and distant. Advising all residents in Gilpin and Clear Creek counties to shelter in place. Roads are impassable. Visibility 0. This is a life-threatening storm. Do not attempt to travel. He clicked it off. He wasn't going anywhere. Hadn't planned to. The nearest town, a place called Pinewood with a population of 312, was 15 miles down a winding mountain road that was probably buried under 4 feet of snow by now. He had enough firewood to last 2 weeks. Enough food for a month if he rationed. He'd be fine. Jackson finished his coffee and set the mug in the sink. He pulled on his boots, his heavy coat, and stepped out onto the porch to check the firewood stacks he kept under the overhang. The cold hit him like a fist. The temperature had dropped fast, probably 10 below 0 now, maybe colder with the wind. He pulled his collar up and moved quickly, grabbing an armful of split pine and turning back toward the door. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Faint, almost swallowed by the wind, but unmistakable. Crying. Jackson froze, wood still cradled in his arms. He turned his head, listening. The wind shrieked. The pines creaked and swayed. And then he heard it again. A child's voice, thin and desperate, somewhere out in the storm. He dropped the wood and ran. His boots punched through the snow as he moved toward the sound, flashlight beam cutting through the swirling white. He shouted into the wind, but his voice was ripped away before it could carry. He kept moving, heart pounding, every instinct screaming that no child should be out here, not in this, not alone. Then he saw her. A small shape huddled against the base of a pine tree, 20 yards from the cabin. She was curled into herself, arms wrapped tight, her coat too thin for the cold. Her hair was matted with snow. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue. She wasn't moving. Jackson dropped to his knees beside her and pressed his fingers to her neck. Pulse. Faint. But there. He scooped her up, shocked by how light she was, and ran back to the cabin. The wind fought him every step, but he didn't stop. He kicked the door open, carried her inside, and laid her gently on the rug in front of the fire. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. She tried to speak, but only a small whimper came out. Jackson moved fast. He'd done this before, hypothermia, stage 2, maybe 3. He pulled off her wet coat, her soaked sneakers, her frozen socks. He wrapped her in blankets, layered them thick, then grabbed a towel and carefully dried her hair. "You're okay," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've got you. You're safe now." She didn't respond. Her eyes closed again. Her breathing was shallow, too slow. Jackson cursed under his breath and moved to the kitchen. He filled a pot with water, set it on the stove to warm, not too hot, just enough to bring her core temperature up gradually. He soaked a cloth in the warm water and pressed it gently to her hands, her feet, her forehead. Minutes passed. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and slowly, painfully, color began to return to her face. Her eyes opened again, clearer this time. She looked up at Jackson with the kind of fear that broke something in his chest. "Where?" she whispered. "Where am I?" "You're in my cabin," Jackson said. "You were outside in the storm. Do you remember how you got here?" She stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. Tears filled her eyes. I don't know." Jackson didn't push. He just nodded and pulled the blankets tighter around her. "What's your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "Okay, Emma. My name's Jackson. You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you, but I need to make sure you're okay. Can you wiggle your fingers for me?" She tried. Her fingers moved slowly, stiffly, but they moved. Jackson checked her toes. Same thing. No frostbite. Not yet. She'd been lucky. Another 10 minutes out there and she wouldn't have made it. "Good," he said. "That's real good. Now I'm going to get you something warm to drink, okay? Just stay right there." He stood and moved to the kitchen, heating water for tea. His mind raced. A child. Out here, in a blizzard. It didn't make sense. There were no other cabins for miles, no roads close enough for her to have wandered from. And she was too young, maybe 7 or 8, to have come this far alone. He brought her the tea, sweet and warm, and helped her sit up enough to drink. She took small sips, her hands shaking as she held the mug. "Emma," Jackson said gently. "Do you remember anything about how you got here? Were you with someone?" Her eyes darted to the door, then back to him. She nodded. "Who were you with?" My aunt," she whispered. "We were in a car." Jackson's stomach tightened. "Where's the car now?" Emma's face crumpled. "I don't know. We went off the road. There was ice, and then she told me to run." "Your aunt told you to run?" Emma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She said not to stop. She said to find help. But I got lost, and it was so cold, and I couldn't. She broke down, her small body shaking with sobs. Jackson knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder, careful, gentle. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now. We'll figure this out." But even as he said it, his mind was working through the logistics. A car accident. Somewhere close enough for her to walk here, but far enough that he hadn't heard it. That put it within a 2, maybe 3-mile radius. But in this storm, visibility was 0. Searching would be suicide. And if her aunt had told her to run, that meant something else was wrong. Something beyond just the crash. Jackson stood and moved to the radio. He turned it on, adjusted the frequency to the emergency band, and tried to raise someone. Static. He tried again. Still nothing. The storm was too thick, the mountains too high. He was cut off. He turned back to Emma. She had stopped crying and was staring into the fire, her small hands clutched around the mug. "Emma," he said carefully, "was anyone else in the car with you?" She shook her head. "Just me and Aunt Sarah." "And your aunt, did she get out of the car?" Emma's face went blank. Empty. She didn't answer. Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He didn't press further, not yet. She was in shock, traumatized. Pushing her now would only make it worse. Instead, he stood and checked the windows, making sure they were sealed tight. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. He'd have to wait until morning, maybe longer, before he could even think about going out to search for the car. He turned back to Emma. "Are you hungry?" She nodded. He made her soup from a can, tomato with crackers, and watched as she ate slowly, her hands still trembling. When she finished, he helped her to the couch and wrapped her in more blankets. "You need to rest," he said. "I'll be right here. You're safe." Emma looked up at him with those wide, terrified eyes. "Promise?" "I promise." She closed her eyes. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. She was asleep. Jackson sat in the chair across from her, watching the rise and fall of her small chest. His mind wouldn't stop. A child, out here, alone. It didn't add up. And the way she'd said her aunt told her to run, there was something in her voice, something beyond fear of the crash. He stood and moved to the window, staring out into the storm. The snow fell in thick, relentless waves. Somewhere out there was a car, maybe a body, maybe answers. But for now, all he had was a frightened little girl and a storm that wouldn't quit. The night stretched long and cold. Jackson didn't sleep. He kept the fire going, checked on Emma every hour, and listened to the wind tear through the trees like something alive and angry. By morning, the storm had eased slightly, but the world outside was buried. Snow piled 4 feet high against the cabin walls. Drifts covered the porch. The pines bowed under the weight. Emma woke slowly, her eyes blinking open with confusion before the fear returned. She sat up, looking around the cabin as if she'd forgotten where she was. "Morning," Jackson said from the kitchen. He was making oatmeal, the only thing he had that felt right for a kid. "How are you feeling?" "Cold," she whispered. "I'll get the fire going stronger. You want some breakfast?" She nodded. He brought her a bowl of oatmeal with a little honey stirred in and watched as she ate. She was calmer this morning, but still guarded, still scared. "Emma," he said gently, "I need to ask you some more questions. Is that okay?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "When the car went off the road, do you remember where you were, what the road looked like?" Emma frowned, thinking. "There were trees, lots of trees, and the road was really curvy. We were going up." Jackson nodded. That described half the roads in the Rockies, but it was something. "Do you remember how long you walked before you found my cabin?" She shook her head. "I don't know. A long time. My feet hurt really bad." He glanced at her feet, now wrapped in thick wool socks. She'd walked miles, in the snow, in the dark. The fact that she'd survived was a miracle. "Did your aunt say anything else, before you ran?" Emma's face tightened. She set down her spoon and stared at the bowl. She said not to let them find me." Jackson's blood went cold. "Them? Who's them?" "I don't know," Emma whispered. "She didn't say. She just said to run and hide and not let them find me." Jackson leaned back, his mind racing. This wasn't just a car accident. Something else was happening, something that made a dying woman tell a child to run and hide. "Emma," he said carefully, "are your parents looking for you?" Her eyes filled with tears. "My parents are dead. They died when I was little. Aunt Sarah took care of me." "I'm sorry," Jackson said, and he meant it. "Is there anyone else? Grandparents? Other family?" She shook her head. "Just Aunt Sarah, and now—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Jackson stood and walked to the window. The storm had left a world of white silence. No tracks, no movement. Just endless snow and the skeletal shadows of pines. He needed to find that car, needed to know what happened, but he couldn't leave Emma alone, and he couldn't take her with him. He turned back to her. "I'm going to try the radio again, see if I can reach someone." He spent the next hour cycling through frequencies, trying to raise anyone. Park rangers, sheriff's office, even CB channels truckers used. Nothing. The storm had knocked out everything. He was completely isolated. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds, pale and weak, but enough to give him hope. He bundled up, stepped outside, and began clearing a path to the woodshed. The snow was heavy, wet, exhausting to move, but it gave him time to think. Emma stayed inside, watching him through the window. When he came back in, she was sitting at the small table, drawing on the back of an old envelope with a pencil she'd found. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She held it up. It was a car, crude but clear. "Our car," she said. "It was blue." Jackson studied the drawing. "Emma, was there anything in the car? Anything your aunt had with her?" Emma thought for a moment, then nodded. "A bag, a black bag. She kept it with her all the time. She said it was important." "Do you know what was in it?" Emma shook her head. "She never showed me, but sometimes I heard her talking on the phone about it. She sounded scared." Jackson's instincts flared. Whatever was in that bag, it was important enough to scare a woman. Important enough that she told a child to run and hide. That night, after Emma had gone to sleep, Jackson sat by the fire and thought through everything. A woman driving through a storm with her niece and a mysterious bag. A crash. A warning about them. A child sent running into the wilderness. This wasn't random. This was intentional. He stood and began moving through the cabin, checking locks on doors and windows. Old habits from his search and rescue days. Always secure the perimeter. Always have an exit plan. He hadn't thought about those things in years. But now, with Emma sleeping on his couch and questions piling up like the snow outside, he couldn't afford to be careless. The next day, Emma began to open up. Small things at first. She told him she liked pancakes. That her favorite color was purple. That she'd had a dog once named Biscuit. Jackson listened, letting her talk, letting her feel safe. But it was on the third day, when she was helping him stack firewood inside, that she said something that changed everything. She was carrying small pieces, her arms barely able to hold them, when she stopped and looked at him. "Jackson," she said quietly. "Yeah?" "Aunt Sarah, before the crash, she said something about a mountain property. She said we had to get there before they did. She said it was the only way to keep me safe." Jackson set down the wood he was holding. "A mountain property. Did she say where?" Emma shook her head. "No, but she had a map in the black bag. She kept looking at it." Jackson's mind spun. A map. A property. Something valuable enough to run from people. Valuable enough to risk driving through a blizzard. And then a thought hit him, cold and sharp. What if it wasn't just about the property? What if it was about this property? He looked around the cabin, the place he'd bought 5 years ago from an estate sale. The previous owner, a man named Walter, had died alone. No family, no one to claim the place. Jackson had bought it for almost nothing. He'd thought he was just buying isolation. But what if there was more? That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Jackson began searching the cabin. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something here, something hidden. He checked the walls, the cupboards, the loft. Nothing. He was about to give up when he noticed Emma had left her drawing on the table. He picked it up, studying it again. The blue car, the trees. And in the corner, something he hadn't noticed before, a small symbol she'd drawn. It looked like a house with an X beneath it. "Emma," he whispered, even though she was asleep. "What were you trying to show me?" He looked down at the floor, at the old pine boards worn smooth by decades of footsteps. And then he saw it. Near the fireplace. A section of boards that didn't quite match the others. The grain ran the wrong direction. The nails looked newer. Jackson knelt and ran his fingers along the seam. It was subtle, almost invisible. But it was there. He stood and grabbed a flashlight and a pry bar from his toolbox. He glanced at Emma, still sleeping, then knelt again and carefully worked the edge of the pry bar between the boards. They came up easier than they should have. One board, then another, and beneath them, hidden in the darkness, was a small metal box. Jackson's heart pounded as he lifted it out. It was heavy, locked, military grade. He turned it over in his hands, looking for markings. There, stamped on the side, were initials W.H., Walter Harrison, the previous owner. Jackson set the box on the table and stared at it. Whatever was inside, Walter had hidden it here, hidden it well. And now, somehow, a woman and a child had been running toward it. He looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully by the fire. And for the first time since he'd found her, he wondered if he'd just become part of something far more dangerous than a winter storm. Jackson didn't sleep that night. He sat at the table, the metal box in front of him, turning it over in his hands like it might whisper its secrets if he was patient enough. The firelight caught the stamped initials on the side. W.H. Walter Harrison. A man Jackson had never met, never even seen a photograph of. Just a name on a deed and a lawyer's voice over the phone 5 years ago, saying the estate needed to sell quickly, and would he be interested in a remote property for next to nothing. He'd said yes without thinking twice. Back then, he'd been desperate for distance from everything. From the mountains that had taken too many lives. From the faces of families he'd had to tell their loved ones weren't coming home. From the weight of all those rescues that had gone wrong. But now, sitting here with a locked box and a sleeping child who'd appeared out of a blizzard, Jackson wondered if maybe he'd bought more than just isolation. Maybe he'd bought someone else's secret. And maybe that secret had just found him. Emma stirred on the couch, mumbling something in her sleep. Jackson watched her small form shift beneath the blankets. She looked peaceful now, color back in her cheeks, breathing steady and strong. 3 days ago, she'd been half frozen in the snow. Now she was drawing pictures and stacking firewood and calling him by his first name like they'd known each other for years. Kids were like that, resilient in ways adults forgot how to be. He turned back to the box. It was locked tight, the kind of military-grade lock that wouldn't budge without the right key or a blowtorch. Jackson had neither. He could force it, but something told him to wait, to think this through. He set it back down and looked at the floorboards he'd pulled up. The compartment beneath was small, maybe 2 feet square, lined with some kind of moisture barrier. Walter had planned this, built it intentionally. This wasn't just a hiding spot. This was a vault. Jackson replaced the boards carefully, making sure they sat flush. No point alerting anyone who might come looking, not until he understood what he was dealing with. Morning came slow and grey. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like the whole mountain was holding its breath. Jackson made coffee and stood at the window, watching the sun struggle to break through the clouds. The snow gleamed, pristine and untouched. No tracks, no movement, just white emptiness stretching in every direction. Emma woke around 8, rubbing her eyes and padding over to the fire in her borrowed socks. Jackson had given her an old thermal shirt of his to sleep in. It hung on her like a dress. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup of hot chocolate he'd made from a packet he found in the back of the cupboard. Probably 3 years old, but it still tasted like chocolate. "Morning," she said quietly, taking the cup with both hands. They sat together in silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound. Then Emma spoke. "Jackson." "Yeah?" "Last night I had a dream about the floorboards." Jackson's pulse quickened. He kept his voice casual. "Yeah? What about them?" "I dreamed there was something underneath, something important, and Aunt Sarah was trying to tell me about it, but I couldn't hear her." She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "Do you think dreams mean things?" Jackson set down his coffee. "Sometimes they do. Why? Did you see something yesterday? Something with the floor?" Emma nodded slowly. "When I was helping with the firewood, I stepped on a board and it felt different, loose, like it wasn't nailed down right." Jackson's mind raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "Show me." Emma led him to the spot near the fireplace, the exact spot where he'd found the metal box. She pointed down. "There, it moves a little when you step on it." Jackson knelt and pressed his hand against the board. He'd replaced it carefully, but Emma was right. There was the slightest give. She had good instincts, better than most adults. "You're right," he said. "It does feel loose. You want to help me check it out?" Emma nodded, her fear replaced by curiosity. Jackson grabbed his tools and, with Emma watching closely, carefully pried up the boards again. This time, he removed more of them, widening the opening. Emma leaned in, her eyes going wide. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know yet," Jackson said, "but I found it last night after you went to sleep." He lifted out the metal box and set it on the floor between them. Emma reached out, her small fingers tracing the initials. "W.H., she read aloud. "Who's that?" "Walter Harrison. He owned this cabin before me, lived here for a long time, died about 5 years ago." Emma frowned. Why would he hide a box under the floor? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Jackson examined the lock more closely in the daylight. It was a combination lock, old but well maintained. He tried a few random sequences. Nothing. He was about to set it aside when Emma spoke. Can I try? Jackson raised an eyebrow. You know the combination? No, but... She bit her lip. Aunt Sarah used to say that people hide things in numbers that mean something to them, like birthdays or addresses. Smart kid. Jackson handed her the box. Go ahead. Emma turned the dial slowly, her face scrunched in concentration. She tried a few combinations, then paused. What year did Walter die? 2019. Emma's fingers moved on the dial. 2019, click. The lock popped open. Jackson stared at her. How did you... Lucky guess, Emma said. But she was smiling, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Jackson opened the box carefully. Inside were papers, dozens of them, folded and stacked with precision. He pulled out the first bundle and unfolded it on the floor. Coordinates, latitude and longitude written in neat handwriting. Beneath them, a hand-drawn map of the surrounding area with elevation markers and geological notations. Jackson recognized the terrain. This was his property, or at least close to it. Emma leaned over his shoulder. What is it? A map. And these? He pulled out another stack of papers. These are land deeds, claim registrations, survey reports. He spread them out, his mind working through the implications. Walter hadn't just owned the cabin. He'd owned the mineral rights to the surrounding land, hundreds of acres. And according to these documents, he'd never filed official claims. These were preliminary surveys, research notes, documentation of something he'd found but never reported. Jackson? Emma's voice was small. There's something else. She pointed to the bottom of the box. Beneath all the papers was a leather journal, worn and stained. Jackson lifted it out and opened to the first page. The handwriting was the same as on the maps. Neat, precise, scientific. Discovery log, Walter Harrison, geologist, January 12, 2007. Jackson flipped through the pages. Entries spanning 12 years, samples collected, tests conducted, chemical analyses, density measurements, depth calculations, and then, about halfway through, an entry that made Jackson's blood run cold. June 3, 2014, confirmation received. The deposit is real. Preliminary estimates suggest value in excess of 200 million, possibly more. Rare earth elements, titanium, lithium. Concentrations unlike anything documented in this region. This could change everything. But I can't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I know I can protect it. Keep it from the corporations who will tear this mountain apart and leave nothing but scars. I need time to think, time to plan, time to find someone I can trust. Jackson sat back, the journal trembling in his hands. 200 million, maybe more, buried beneath his cabin, beneath his feet. This was what Walter had hidden. This was what he'd died protecting. Jackson? Emma's voice pulled him back. What does it say? He looked at her, this small girl who'd stumbled into his life 3 days ago, and saw something in her eyes that made him pause. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting for this moment. Emma, he said carefully, I need you to tell me the truth, the whole truth, about your aunt, about why you were really coming here. Emma's face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm sorry I didn't tell you before. I was scared. It's okay, Jackson said gently. But I need to know now. Can you tell me? Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She took a shaky breath and began. Aunt Sarah, she wasn't really my aunt. I mean, she was, but it's complicated. My real parents died when I was 3. Car accident. I don't remember them. Aunt Sarah, she was my mom's sister. She took me in, raised me. But we moved a lot. She said it was for her work. She was a geologist like Walter. They used to work together. Jackson's heart began to pound. Walter was her colleague? Emma shook her head. He was her father, my grandfather, but I never met him. Aunt Sarah said they didn't talk anymore, that they'd had a fight about something and he'd shut her out. She tried to reach him for years, but he never answered her letters. And then last year she got a call from a lawyer saying Walter had died and left something for her. The map, Jackson said. Emma nodded. And a letter. It said he was sorry, that he'd found something important and he'd wanted to protect it. But he'd made mistakes. He said he should have trusted her, and he wanted her to finish what he started, to make sure the deposit went to the right people, not to corporations, to communities, to help people. Jackson felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Walter had found a fortune buried in the mountain, had spent years keeping it secret, pushing away the only family he had left. And now that family was gone too. But someone else found out, Jackson said quietly. Emma's eyes went dark. Aunt Sarah said people had been following us for weeks. She didn't know who they were, but they knew about Walter's discovery. They'd broken into our apartment, gone through her files. She said we had to get to the cabin before they did, that the real proof was here, the samples, the data, everything Walter had collected. The black bag, Jackson said, the one you mentioned before. She had copies of everything, maps, documents, but she said the originals were hidden here, that Walter had built a vault, that he'd never told anyone where it was, but she thought she could find it. She'd studied his notes, figured out the location. Jackson looked down at the floorboards, at the small compartment he'd uncovered. This isn't the vault. This is just the entrance. Emma stared at him. What do you mean? Jackson stood and began examining the walls around the fireplace. Walter had been a geologist, a scientist. He wouldn't just bury a fortune under a few floorboards. He'd build something secure, something deep, something that could last. He pressed his hands against the stone fireplace, feeling for irregularities. The mortar was old, crumbling in places. But near the base, on the left side, he felt something different. A stone that shifted slightly under pressure. He pushed harder. Click. A section of the floor beside the fireplace dropped inward, revealing a hidden hatch. Not wood, metal. And beneath it, darkness. Emma gasped. Is that? The vault, Jackson finished. They stared at the opening for a long moment. Then Jackson grabbed his flashlight and knelt beside the hatch. He shone the light down. Stone steps descended into the earth, carved directly into the bedrock. Walter hadn't just hidden his discovery, he'd built a temple for it. Stay here, Jackson said. No, Emma said firmly. I'm coming with you. Jackson started to argue, then stopped. She had as much right to see this as he did. More, maybe. This was her grandfather's legacy. Okay, he said, but stay close. They descended together, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The steps were steep, maybe 20 of them, ending in a small chamber carved out of solid rock. The air was cool and dry, perfectly preserved. And there, lining the walls, were wooden crates, dozens of them. Jackson approached the nearest one and carefully pried open the lid. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, were rock samples. But these weren't ordinary rocks. They glittered in the flashlight beam, veins of metal running through them like lightning frozen in stone. He opened another crate. Documents, geological surveys, chemical analyses, core samples labeled with dates and depth measurements. Another crate held what looked like gemstones, but Jackson recognized them as something else, raw minerals, unprocessed. Some he recognized, lithium, cobalt. Others he didn't. Emma stood in the center of the chamber, turning slowly. There's so much, she whispered. Jackson opened a fourth crate and found what he was looking for. A typed report, professionally formatted, dated June 2014. The title read, Comprehensive Geological Survey and Economic Assessment of Mineral Deposits, Harrison Property, Gilpin County, Colorado. He scanned the document, his pulse quickening with every line. Rare earth elements, critical for modern technology. Phones, computers, electric vehicles, renewable energy systems. The world was desperate for them, and most of the supply was controlled by foreign governments. A domestic source would be worth, he found the number on page 12, estimated total value of extractable deposits, $310 million, minimum. Jackson lowered the report, his hands numb. $310 million buried under his cabin. He looked at Emma, who was examining a sample of what looked like blue-green crystal. She held it up to the light, watching it shimmer. Aunt Sarah said this could help a lot of people, she said softly. She said Walter wanted to build schools and hospitals and help towns like Pinewood that were dying because all the jobs left. Jackson's throat tightened. Walter hadn't hidden this out of greed. He'd hidden it because he'd known what would happen if the wrong people found it. Mining corporations would tear the mountain apart. Local communities would get nothing but dust and contaminated water. He'd spent years trying to figure out how to do it right, and he'd run out of time. "Your aunt," Jackson said quietly. She was trying to finish his work. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "And now she's gone, and they're still looking, and I don't know what to do." Jackson knelt in front of her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Hey, look at me." She met his eyes. "We're going to figure this out," he said. "Together, I promise." Emma threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his shoulder. Jackson held her, this small broken girl who'd been given a burden no child should carry, and felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 5 years running from responsibility, from connection, from the weight of caring about what happened to other people. But standing here in this vault, holding a child who needed him, Jackson realized he was done running. They climbed back up the steps together. Jackson sealed the hatch and replaced the floorboards. Whatever happened next, they needed to be smart, careful. He made Emma lunch, grilled cheese and soup, and they ate in silence. His mind was racing, working through options. He needed to contact authorities, the sheriff, maybe the FBI. This was bigger than him, bigger than both of them, but Emma's words kept echoing in his head. She said people had been following us. She said we had to get here first. First. That meant others were coming. Jackson stood and moved to the window. The sun was high now, the snow brilliant and blinding. He scanned the tree line looking for anything out of place. Nothing. Just pines and silence and... Wait. There, maybe half a mile down the mountain, a glint of metal. Brief, then gone. Jackson's blood turned to ice. He grabbed his binoculars from the shelf and focused on the spot. At first, nothing. Then movement. A figure in dark clothing moving between the trees. Then another. They were being watched. What happens next will turn this quiet mountain standoff into a deadly game of survival, reveal the truth about who's hunting this little girl, and remind us why sometimes the strongest bonds are forged when everything is on the line. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Jackson lowered the binoculars, his military training kicking in. 2 visible targets. Probably more he couldn't see. They were doing surveillance, establishing positions, which meant they weren't sure if this was the right location. Not yet. They were watching, waiting for confirmation. He turned to Emma, keeping his voice calm. "Emma, I need you to listen very carefully. We're going to play a game, okay? A quiet game." Emma's eyes went wide. "Are they here?" "I don't know yet, but we need to be ready just in case. Can you be brave for me?" She nodded, her small hands clenching into fists. Jackson moved through the cabin quickly, systematically. He closed curtains, locked doors, checked the rifle he kept in the closet, an old Winchester 30-30. He hadn't fired it in 2 years, but it was clean and loaded. Then he did something he hadn't done since his search and rescue days. He started building an emergency pack. Food, water, first aid, warm clothes, flashlights, everything they'd need if they had to run. "Jackson?" Emma's voice was small. "What's happening?" He knelt in front of her. "I saw some people on the mountain. They might just be hikers. But your aunt told you to run and hide, so we're going to have a backup plan just in case. There's a trail behind the cabin that leads deeper into the mountains. If I tell you to go, I need you to take this pack and run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run until you find help." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you, but if I'm not, you keep going. You understand?" Emma's lip trembled. "I don't want to leave you." "You won't have to. This is just in case." He squeezed her hand. Trust me?" She nodded. Jackson stood and moved back to the window. The figures were gone now, melted back into the trees, but he knew they were there, watching, waiting. He had to think. These weren't random hikers. Emma's aunt had been running from them, had died trying to keep them away from this place, which meant they knew about the deposit, or at least suspected. But how much did they know? Did they know about the vault, about the samples, or were they just following leads, hoping to get lucky? Jackson's mind worked through the scenario. If they knew everything, they'd have moved already. The fact that they were watching meant they were looking for confirmation, which gave him time. Not much, but enough to make a plan. He moved to the back room where he kept his old search and rescue gear, radio equipment, GPS, satellite phone. He'd kept it all when he left the service just in case. He'd never thought he'd need it again. He powered up the satellite phone. It took a minute to find a signal, but when it did, he had a clear connection. He dialed the number for the Gilpin County Sheriff's Office. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Sheriff's Office, this is Jackson Cole. I'm calling from a cabin 15 miles north of Pinewood. I have a situation here. A missing child showed up 3 days ago during the storm. I think someone's looking for her, and I think we're in danger." There was a pause. "Say that again. You have a missing child?" "Her name is Emma. She's 7 years old. Her aunt died in a car accident somewhere near my property. The child walked here through the storm. I've been sheltering her, but I think the people her aunt was running from have found us." Jesus. "Okay. Stay on the line. I'm transferring you to Sheriff Mullins." Static. Then a gruff voice. "This is Mullins. You're Jackson Cole, the guy who bought the old Harrison place?" "That's right." "And you're saying you've got a kid there? Someone's missing child?" "I don't know if anyone's reported her missing, but she's here, and she's in danger. I need backup, now." Mullins hesitated. "Mr. Cole, I can't just send deputies up there without knowing what's going on. We've got procedures. There are men watching my cabin right now, armed. I don't know who they are or what they want, but this girl is terrified, and her aunt told her to run and hide before she died. I'm not making this up." Another pause. Longer this time. "All right, I'll send someone, but it's going to take time. Roads are still a mess from the storm. Could be 3-4 hours before we can get to you." Jackson's jaw tightened. 3 or 4 hours might be too late. "It's the best I can do. Sit tight, keep the girl safe, and don't do anything stupid." The line went dead. Jackson lowered the phone, frustration burning in his chest. 3 or 4 hours. The men outside could move in 5 minutes. He was on his own. He turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, the backpack he'd prepared on her shoulders. "Are they coming?" she asked. "Yes," Jackson said, "but not for a while. We need to hold out until they get here." Emma nodded, then reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" Jackson asked. "I found it, in the vault. While you were looking at the samples, it was tucked in one of the crates." She handed it to him. Jackson unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map, more detailed than the others. It showed the cabin, the vault entrance, and beneath it, another marking. An X with a note beside it in Walter's handwriting. "Secondary access, emergency exit, 20 yards north, hidden beneath the old well house." Jackson's pulse quickened. Walter had built a back door. He looked at Emma. "You might have just saved us." Outside, the sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the snow, and in the distance, barely visible through the trees, Jackson saw movement again. They were closing in. He grabbed the pack, took Emma's hand, and moved to the back of the cabin. The old well house was exactly where the map showed it, a small stone structure half buried in snow. Jackson cleared away the drifts and found the door, rusted but still solid. Inside, beneath a rotting wooden cover, was another hatch. Smaller than the one in the cabin, but unmistakable. Walter hadn't just built a vault, he'd built an escape route. Jackson looked back toward the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lights glowed in the windows. From a distance, it would look occupied, peaceful. But he and Emma wouldn't be there. He lifted the hatch and looked down into darkness. Stone steps descended into the earth, running parallel to the main vault. "This is our way out," he said. Emma stared down into the black. "Where does it go?" "I don't know, but anywhere is better than here." He helped her down the first few steps, then followed, pulling the hatch closed behind them. The darkness swallowed them whole. But somewhere above, in the fading light of a Colorado evening, headlights appeared on the distant mountain road. And Jackson knew their time had just run out. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for Jackson's shoulders. The walls were rough-hewn stone, cold and damp to the touch. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness ahead, each drop echoing like a clock counting down. Emma pressed close behind him, her small hand gripping the back of his jacket. He could feel her trembling. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yeah," she whispered back, but her voice shook. Jackson moved forward slowly, the flashlight beam sweeping the passage ahead. The tunnel ran straight for maybe 50 feet, then curved left. Walter had carved this by hand, probably over years. The dedication it must have taken, the paranoia, or maybe just the wisdom to know that valuable secrets needed escape routes. They reached the curve, and Jackson paused, listening. Nothing, just the drip of water and Emma's quick breathing. He glanced back at her. In the flashlight's glow, her face was pale, eyes wide. "We're okay," he said quietly. "This tunnel leads away from the cabin. We'll come up somewhere safe and wait for the sheriff." What if they find the tunnel? They won't. Walter was smart. This has been hidden for years. Nobody knows about it except us. Emma nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear he'd seen 3 days ago when she'd woken up half frozen on his floor. She was just a kid, 7 years old. She should have been worried about homework and playground games, not running through secret tunnels from armed men. Jackson pushed the anger down and kept moving. The tunnel continued for another 100 yards, sloping gently upward. His knees ached from the crouch, and his neck was cramping from keeping his head low. But then the passage widened and the ceiling rose. They could stand. Emma straightened, rolling her shoulders. "How much farther?" "I don't know, but we're moving away from the cabin. That's what matters." They walked for another 10 minutes, maybe more. Jackson had lost track of time down here. The tunnel twisted and turned, following the natural contours of the bedrock. Walter had built this to be confusing, difficult to follow. Anyone who stumbled into it would get lost quickly. Finally, the passage ended at a wooden ladder built into the stone wall. Jackson shone the light up. 20 feet above was another hatch, this one with a simple latch. "This is it," he said. Emma looked up, her face tight with exhaustion. "Can you see where it goes?" "No, but there's only one way to find out." Jackson climbed first, testing each rung before putting his weight on it. The wood was old but solid. Walter had built things to last. At the top, he pressed his ear against the hatch and listened. Wind, the creak of trees, nothing else. He pushed the hatch open slowly, just an inch, and peered out. They were in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. Snow covered everything, untouched. No tracks. No signs of anyone nearby. Jackson pushed the hatch fully open and climbed out, then reached down to help Emma up. The cold air hit them like a wall after the stillness of the tunnel. Emma shivered, and Jackson quickly pulled her jacket tighter around her. He looked around, getting his bearings. The sun was lower now, maybe an hour from setting. They were north of the cabin, probably a quarter mile. Through the trees, he could just make out smoke rising from his chimney, and then he saw them. 3 vehicles parked on the access road near his property. Black SUVs with tinted windows. Men in dark clothing moving between the trees, closing in on the cabin in a coordinated pattern. Jackson's blood ran cold. These weren't hikers. These were professionals. He pulled out his binoculars and focused on the closest figure. The man wore tactical gear, had a radio clipped to his vest, and moved with the precision of someone with military training. Jackson counted 6 men visible, but there were probably more. "Who are they?" Emma whispered. Jackson lowered the binoculars. "I don't know, but they're not here to talk." He pulled out the satellite phone and tried the sheriff again. It rang and rang. No answer. He tried again. Same result. "Damn it," he muttered. Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Jackson, look!" She was pointing to the cabin. One of the men had reached the front door. He tried the handle, found it locked, then kicked it in. 2 more men rushed inside. Jackson's jaw clenched. They were in his home, going through his things, and he couldn't do a damn thing about it. Minutes passed. The men searched the cabin, then emerged. One of them was talking into a radio, shaking his head. They fanned out, checking the woodshed, the well house, the perimeter, looking for something, or someone. Then a 4th vehicle pulled up. Newer, more expensive. A man stepped out, tall and lean, wearing a long coat that looked too clean for the mountains. He moved with authority, and the other men deferred to him immediately. Jackson adjusted the binoculars, focusing on the man's face. Late 40s, sharp features, dark hair graying at the temples. He looked like someone used to being in charge. Used to getting what he wanted. The man surveyed the scene, then pulled out a phone and made a call. Jackson couldn't hear what was being said, but the body language was clear. Frustration, impatience. The man gestured sharply at the cabin, then at the surrounding forest. He was looking for them. Emma pressed against Jackson's side. "That's him," she whispered. "Who?" "The man from the car, the one who was chasing us before the crash." Jackson's grip tightened on the binoculars. "You saw him?" Emma nodded. "When we stopped for gas, he was there, watching us. Aunt Sarah saw him too. That's why she drove so fast. Why she went up the mountain road instead of staying on the highway. She was trying to lose him. Did your aunt know who he was?" Emma shook her head. "She just said he was dangerous, that he worked for people who wanted what Grandpa Walter found, and that he wouldn't stop until he got it." Jackson watched the man end his call and turn to one of his men. They exchanged words, then the man pointed toward the forest, toward the north, toward where Jackson and Emma were hiding. They were searching the woods. "We need to move," Jackson said quietly. He replaced the hatch carefully, covering it with snow and pine needles. Then he took Emma's hand and led her deeper into the trees, moving north and east, away from the cabin and the men. They walked for 20 minutes, staying low, avoiding open areas. The forest was thick here, the snow deep. It slowed them down, but also provided cover. Jackson kept checking behind them, looking for pursuit. So far, nothing, but that wouldn't last. They reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. Jackson stopped and pulled out his map, the old topographical one he kept for hiking. He traced their route with his finger. They were about 2 miles from the cabin now. The nearest structure was an old fire watchtower, maybe another mile east, abandoned for years, but it would provide shelter. And more importantly, elevation. He could see them coming. "Can you make it another mile?" he asked Emma. She nodded, though her face was pale with exhaustion. They pressed on, the light fading around them. The temperature was dropping fast. Jackson's breath came in white clouds, and Emma's lips were starting to turn blue again. He gave her his gloves and pulled up her hood, but it wasn't enough. She needed warmth, food, rest. The watchtower appeared through the trees like a skeletal finger pointing at the sky. 70 feet tall, wooden construction, half of it rotted away. The stairs looked treacherous, but the platform at the top was still intact. Jackson tested the first few steps. They groaned but held. He looked at Emma. "Think you can climb?" She looked up at the tower, her small face set with determination. "Yeah." They climbed slowly, Jackson going first and testing each step before letting Emma follow. Several boards were missing, forcing them to jump small gaps. Emma didn't complain, didn't hesitate. She just climbed. At the top, the platform was small but solid. The old watch station itself was gone, just a foundation remaining. But the view was clear in every direction. Jackson could see for miles. He looked southwest toward his cabin. Smoke still rose from the chimney, a thin grey line against the darkening sky. And around it, like ants circling a prize, the men moved in systematic patterns, searching, hunting. Emma sat against the railing, pulling her knees to her chest. What are they looking for? The vault, the samples, proof that Walter's discovery was real. What if they find it? Jackson sat beside her. Then they'll take everything. The minerals, the land. They'll strip this mountain bare and leave nothing behind but poison and holes. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Aunt Sarah told me Grandpa Walter was a good man. She said he made mistakes, but he wanted to do something important with what he found. She said he wanted to help people. Jackson looked at her. What kind of help? Schools? Hospitals? Jobs for people in towns like Pinewood where everything's dying. She said $310 million could change a lot of lives if the right people were in charge of it. 310 million. Jackson still couldn't wrap his head around that number. It was more money than everyone in Pinewood would earn in their entire lives combined. Money that could rebuild a whole region, fund education, healthcare, infrastructure. Or it could make a few rich men richer while destroying the mountain and poisoning the water table. Your aunt was right, Jackson said quietly. Walter wanted to do something good. That's why he hid it. He was trying to figure out how to make sure it went to the right people. But he died before he could. Yeah, he did. Emma looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. What are we going to do? Jackson didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the men below, about the satellite phone in his pack, about the sheriff who was 3 or 4 hours away, maybe more now, about a scared little girl who'd been given a burden no child should carry. And he was thinking about himself, about the man he used to be, the one who ran into danger to save people, and the man he'd become, the one who'd hidden in these mountains for 5 years because he couldn't save everyone. We're going to finish what Walter started, he said finally. Emma blinked. How? I don't know yet, but we've got the samples, the documentation, the proof, and we've got something they don't. What? Time. They're searching blind right now. They don't know about the vault or the tunnel or where we are, which means we have a window to get this information to people who can do something with it, people who can make sure Walter's discovery goes to the communities instead of corporations. Emma's face lit up with something that might have been hope. You mean like journalists? Or the government? Jackson pulled out the satellite phone. Both, but we need to be smart about it. If we just hand this over to one person, it could get buried. We need to spread it wide, make it public, make it impossible to ignore. He started making a list in his head. Federal geologists, environmental agencies, state representatives, journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. He knew a few from his search and rescue days, people who'd covered stories about mining disasters and environmental damage. But first, he needed to document everything. He pulled out his camera, the old digital one he kept for trail photography, and started taking pictures of the documents Emma had brought up from the vault. Every page, every map, every survey report. He photographed the mineral samples, the coordinates, Walter's journal entries. Emma watched him work. What about the samples, the actual rocks? We'll hide them, somewhere safe, but the information is what matters. Once this gets out, geologists will come. They'll verify everything. The samples are just proof. By the time he finished, full dark had fallen. The temperature had dropped to near 0. Emma was shivering despite the extra layers Jackson had wrapped around her. He made her eat one of the protein bars from his pack and drink water. She needed calories, energy. They had a long night ahead. Below, lights appeared, flashlights moving through the forest. The search was expanding. Jackson watched them, counting. 8 lights visible. They were working in a grid pattern, sweeping methodically. Professional, thorough, and they were getting closer. He estimated they had maybe 2 hours before the search reached the tower. And up here, they were trapped. The only way down was the stairs, and those would be visible to anyone approaching. Jackson's mind raced. They could try to slip away in the darkness, but Emma was exhausted and the temperature was still dropping. Moving through the forest at night in these conditions was suicide, but staying here meant getting cornered. Then the satellite phone buzzed. Jackson grabbed it, hoping it was the sheriff. "Cole," he answered. "Mr. Cole, this is Sheriff Mullins. We're having trouble reaching your location. Roads are worse than we thought. We're still at least 2 hours out." Jackson's heart sank. 2 hours might be too late. They're here. Multiple armed men searching the forest. They've already broken into my cabin. Can you identify them? Negative, but they're organized. Military-style gear. This isn't some random search party. There was a pause. "Mr. Cole, I need you to stay calm and stay hidden. Do not engage these men. Do not try to be a hero. Just keep the girl safe and wait for us." "I'm trying, Sheriff, but they're closing in." "We're moving as fast as we can. Sit tight." The line went dead. Jackson lowered the phone and looked at Emma. She'd heard everything. "They're not going to make it in time, are they?" she said quietly. Jackson wanted to lie, to tell her everything would be fine, but he'd never lied to a kid in his life, and he wasn't going to start now. "I don't know," he said, "but we're not giving up." He stood and looked out over the valley. The lights below had spread wider. They were searching in all directions now, not just toward the north, which meant they didn't know where to look. They were guessing, but eventually they'd guess right. Jackson made a decision. He pulled out the satellite phone again and dialed a number he hadn't called in 6 years. It rang 3 times before a woman answered. "Melissa Grant." "Melissa, it's Jackson Cole." Silence. Then, "Jackson, Jesus Christ, I thought you were dead. Where the hell have you been?" "Long story. Listen, I don't have much time. I need your help." Melissa Grant was a journalist for the Denver Post. Jackson had worked with her on a story years ago about illegal mining operations in the Rockies. She was tough, smart, and didn't scare easily. "What's going on?" she asked. Jackson took a breath. "I'm sitting on the biggest story of your career, but I'm also sitting on a mountain with a 7-year-old girl and about a dozen armed men hunting us. I need you to get information out there fast before we're silenced." "Slow down. What information?" "Rare earth mineral deposit, $310 million minimum, hidden by a geologist named Walter Harrison for over a decade. He died before he could file claims. His daughter tried to finish his work and was killed 3 days ago. Her daughter is with me now, and the people who killed her are here." Melissa was quiet for a long moment. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I'm sending you photos right now, documentation, surveys, samples, everything. I need you to publish this tonight. Make it national. Make it impossible to bury." "Jackson, if what you're saying is true, this is huge, but I need verification. I need sources. I can't just—" "You will have sources, federal geologists, state mining boards, but it starts with you getting this out there tonight. Once it's public, they can't kill us to keep it quiet." Another pause. "They're trying to kill you?" "I don't know what their orders are, but they've broken into my home. They're hunting through the forest with tactical gear, and they're not here to negotiate. So yeah, I think killing us is on the table." "Jesus. Okay, send me everything. I'll start writing. But Jackson, you need to get somewhere safe." "Working on it. Just promise me you'll publish this. Tonight." "I promise." Jackson started uploading photos to her email, the satellite connection maddeningly slow. Each photo took 30 seconds, sometimes more. He had 47 images to send. Emma watched the lights below creeping closer. "Jackson, they're getting really close." "I know, just a few more minutes." But they didn't have a few more minutes. One of the flashlight beams swept across the base of the tower, then stopped, swung back. The beam traveled up the wooden structure inch by inch until it hit the platform where Jackson and Emma sat. A voice shouted from below, "Contact! Tower at grid reference 723. Jackson cursed and grabbed Emma, pulling her flat against the platform. The phone was only halfway through the upload. More lights converged on the tower. Men's voices carried on the cold air, coordinating, setting up positions. Then a new voice, calm, authoritative, the man from the car. "Jackson Cole, I know you're up there, and I know you have the girl." Jackson didn't respond. He kept his hand on Emma's shoulder, keeping her down.
"My name is Victor Brennan," the voice continued. "I represent Apex Mining Corporation. We're very interested in the property you're currently occupying. I'd like to discuss a business arrangement."
Jackson's jaw clenched. Apex Mining. He'd heard of them. One of the biggest mineral extraction companies in the country, known for aggressive acquisitions and environmental disasters. "Mr. Cole, I know you're listening. I'm not your enemy. I'm a businessman, and I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer for your cooperation." The satellite phone buzzed. Upload complete. Jackson quickly typed a message to Melissa. "They found us. Publish everything now." He hit send and waited. The message went through. Emma looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" Jackson considered their options. They could try to climb down the backside of the tower, but they'd be visible and vulnerable. They could stay up here, but they'd be trapped. Or he could talk, buy time, see what Brennan really wanted. He made his choice. "What kind of offer?" Jackson called down. There was a pause. Then Brennan's voice, closer now. He'd moved to the base of the tower. "A smart one. Your property sits on top of a valuable mineral deposit. You legally own it. That means you own the mineral rights. I'm prepared to pay you market value plus a significant bonus for your cooperation. We're talking about life-changing money, Mr. Cole."
"How much?" $5 million, cash, immediate transfer, plus relocation assistance and a consulting fee if you help us navigate the permitting process."
Emma grabbed Jackson's arm. "Don't," she whispered. Jackson ignored her. "And if I say no?" Brennan's tone shifted, hardening. "Then I'll remind you that you're harboring a minor child without legal authority, that you failed to report a death, that you're interfering with a legitimate business investigation. I have lawyers who can make your life very difficult, Mr. Cole. Or we can do this the easy way." "The easy way being I take your money and disappear."
"Exactly. You get rich, I get the deposit, everybody wins."
"Except the communities Walter Harrison wanted to help." Silence. Then Brennan laughed, cold and sharp. "Walter Harrison was a fool. He sat on a fortune for years, paralyzed by idealism. And where did it get him? He died alone, bitter, with nothing to show for his discovery. Is that what you want?" Jackson stood up, making himself visible. 8 men stood around the base of the tower, flashlights pointed up at him. Brennan stood in front, his expensive coat pristine despite the snow and cold. "Walter Harrison wasn't a fool," Jackson said. "He was a man who understood that some things are worth more than money, like making sure a discovery benefits the people who actually live here, not some corporation that'll tear the mountain apart and leave." Brennan's face hardened. "Idealism doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Cole, and it certainly won't keep that little girl warm tonight. Look at her. She's cold, scared, exhausted. Is this really the hill you want to die on?" Jackson looked down at Emma. She was all of those things. Cold, scared, exhausted. Any reasonable person would take the money and run. $5 million. Enough to give Emma a good life. Security, education, everything she needed. But Walter hadn't been reasonable, and neither had Sarah. They'd died protecting this discovery because they believed it could do something more important than make one person rich. And looking at Emma now, seeing the determination in her small face despite her fear, Jackson realized he believed it too. "The answer's no," he said. Brennan's expression went cold. "That's disappointing, Mr. Cole. I was hoping we could settle this professionally. We're done here. I don't think you understand your situation. You're trapped on a tower with nowhere to go. No help coming. That sheriff you called, he's stuck on a road that's conveniently blocked by a fallen tree. My men made sure of that. So it's just you, me, and a very long night ahead." Jackson's blood ran cold. They'd sabotaged the sheriff's route, which meant they'd been monitoring his calls. They knew he'd called for help, knew the timeline, had planned for it. These weren't just corporate thugs. This was a professional operation. Brennan continued, his voice carrying easily in the cold air.
Here's what's going to happen. You're going to climb down from that tower. You're going to hand over any documents or samples you took from the vault, and you're going to sign a transfer of your mineral rights to Apex Mining. In exchange, you get your money and you walk away. And if I refuse? Brennan smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Then I'll have my men come up there and get you, and things will get messy. Is that really what you want? In front of the child? Emma pressed against Jackson's side. He could feel her shaking. Jackson's mind raced. He'd uploaded the information to Melissa, but it would take time for her to verify everything, write the story, get it approved by editors. Hours, maybe. And even then, would it be enough? Would public exposure really stop Brennan and Apex Mining, or would it just make them more desperate? I need time to think, Jackson said. You have 2 minutes. Brennan turned and walked away, speaking quietly into a radio. His men spread out, forming a perimeter around the tower, cutting off any escape. Jackson knelt beside Emma. Listen to me very carefully. I need you to do something brave. What? There's a rope in my pack, climbing rope. I'm going to tie it to this railing and lower you down the backside of the tower. Then I need you to run, east toward the old highway. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run until you find help. Emma's eyes went wide. What about you? I'll hold them off, give you time to get away. No, Emma's voice was firm. I'm not leaving you. Emma, no! Tears streamed down her face. Aunt Sarah told me to run, and I did, and she died alone. I'm not doing that again. I'm not leaving you. Jackson felt something break in his chest. This small, brave girl who'd already lost everyone she loved. She was willing to stay, to face whatever came next, together. He pulled her into a hug. Okay, he whispered. Okay, we stay together. Below, Brennan called up. Time's up, Mr. Cole. What's it going to be? Jackson stood, Emma beside him. He looked down at Brennan and his men, at their weapons and their cold efficiency, and he made his decision. Come get us, he said. For a long moment, nobody moved. The words hung in the frozen air like a challenge carved in ice. Jackson stood at the railing of the watchtower, Emma pressed against his side, staring down at Victor Brennan and his 8 men. The flashlight beams created harsh shadows across Brennan's face, making him look more like a predator than a businessman. Brennan's jaw tightened. Mr. Cole, I don't think you fully grasp your situation. You're 70 feet up on a rotting tower with one way down. You have no leverage, no backup, no way out. Be reasonable. Reasonable? Jackson's voice carried across the valley. You broke into my home. You're hunting a 7-year-old girl through the mountains. You sabotaged emergency responders. And you want me to be reasonable? I want you to be smart, to recognize when you're beaten. I'm not beaten, Jackson said, and neither is she. Walter Harrison spent 13 years protecting his discovery from people like you. His daughter died trying to finish his work. And you think I'm going to hand it all over for a paycheck? Brennan's expression hardened. You're a fool, Cole. Just like Harrison, just like his daughter. And fools in these mountains tend to have accidents. The threat was clear. Jackson felt Emma flinch beside him. That's interesting, Jackson said, keeping his voice steady. Because I just uploaded 47 photographs of Walter's documentation to a journalist at the Denver Post. Survey reports, chemical analyses, core samples, all of it. And about 10 minutes ago she confirmed receipt. So if I have an accident tonight, the whole world's going to know why. It was a bluff. He didn't know if Melissa had received everything yet, let alone if she'd confirmed it. But the look on Brennan's face told him the bluff had landed. You're lying. Am I? You've been monitoring my satellite calls. You should know I made contact with someone. Want to take the chance I'm bluffing? Because if that story runs tomorrow morning, your company's going to be answering some very uncomfortable questions. Brennan pulled out his phone, spoke urgently into it. One of his men approached him, and they conferred in low voices. Jackson couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see Brennan's body language shift from confident to concerned. Emma tugged on Jackson's sleeve. Did she really get it? She whispered. I don't know, Jackson whispered back. but we're about to find out. Minutes passed. The cold bit deeper. Jackson's fingers were going numb despite his gloves. Emma's teeth were chattering. He wrapped his coat tighter around both of them, sharing what little warmth they had left. Then Brennan's phone rang. He answered it, listened, and his face went dark. When he hung up, he looked up at the tower with pure rage in his eyes. "Congratulations, Cole. Your journalist friend is very persistent. She's already reached out to the U.S. Geological Survey for comment, started asking questions about Apex Mining's environmental record, made some preliminary inquiries with the EPA." He paused. "You've made this complicated." "Good," Jackson said. "Complicated means public. Public means you can't just make us disappear." "Don't be so sure," Brennan gestured to his men. Two of them moved toward the tower stairs. Jackson's hand went to his jacket pocket, where he'd tucked the hunting knife he always carried. It wasn't much against 8 armed men, but it was something. He positioned himself between Emma and the top of the stairs. "Jackson," Emma whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm scared." "I know, me too, but we're going to be okay." The two men started climbing. Their boots rang hollow on the wooden steps. Jackson could hear the old structure groaning under their weight. 10 steps, 20, 30. Then a crack like a gunshot. One of the men shouted. A step gave way beneath him and he fell, crashing through 2 more steps before catching himself on the railing. He dangled there for a moment, his flashlight spiraling down into the darkness below. The second man froze. "Tower's unstable," he called down. "Steps are rotted through." "Then climb carefully," Brennan snapped. The man resumed climbing, testing each step before putting weight on it. It slowed him down, but he was still coming. 40 steps. 50. Jackson looked around desperately. The platform had no weapons, no tools, just the old foundation stones from the watch station and... His eyes landed on the rope in his pack. Climbing rope, 60 feet of it. An idea formed. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need you to help me with something. Can you do that?" She nodded, her small face determined despite her fear. Jackson pulled out the rope and quickly tied one end to the railing support post. The old wood was solid there, thick as a telephone pole. He fed the rope through his hands, estimating the length. 55, 60 feet. Enough. He coiled the loose end and moved to the opposite side of the platform, away from the stairs. Below was darkness and deep snow, a 70-foot drop, but better than waiting to be caught. "When I tell you," Jackson said to Emma, "I want you to hold onto my back, wrap your arms around my neck, and don't let go no matter what. Can you do that?" "Are we going down?" "Yeah, fast." The climbing man was at 60 steps now, almost to the top. Jackson could hear his labored breathing, see his hand reaching for the platform edge. "Now, Emma!" Emma jumped onto Jackson's back, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Jackson grabbed the rope with both hands, took 3 running steps, and jumped. They fell. The rope burned through Jackson's gloves as they plummeted. The ground rushed up, darkness and white. Emma screamed into his shoulder. Jackson squeezed the rope harder, friction building, slowing their descent. His shoulders screamed with the strain. His hands felt like they were on fire. They hit the snowbank at the base of the tower hard. The impact drove the air from Jackson's lungs. Snow exploded around them, soft and deep, cushioning the fall. They'd dropped 40 feet before the rope ran out, then fallen the last 30 into a drift that had to be 15 feet deep. Jackson lay stunned for a moment, Emma still clinging to his back. He could hear shouting from above. Flashlight beams swept the area, searching. "Emma," he gasped, "you okay?" "Yeah," she said, her voice shaky but strong. "We need to move, now." Jackson struggled to his feet, pulling Emma with him. The snow was thigh-deep, exhausting to move through, but they pushed forward, away from the tower toward the tree line. Behind them, men were shouting. Brennan's voice cut through the chaos. "Find them! They can't have gone far." Jackson crashed into the forest, Emma clutching his hand. Branches whipped at their faces, roots caught at their feet, but they kept running, lungs burning, legs pumping, running on pure adrenaline and fear. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Jackson's legs gave out. He collapsed against a fallen log, pulling Emma down beside him. They sat in the darkness, breathing hard, listening. Voices in the distance, flashlights sweeping through the trees. The men were searching, but they'd lost the trail in the deep snow. For now. Emma was shaking violently. The temperature had to be near 10 below, and they'd just fallen 70 feet into snow. Jackson pulled her close, trying to share his body heat. "That was crazy," Emma whispered. Despite everything, Jackson almost laughed. "Yeah, it was. Are we safe now?" "Not yet. But we're alive, and that's something." Jackson checked his watch. Just after 8 o'clock at night. They'd been running from Brennan's men for over 3 hours. The sheriff was supposed to arrive hours ago, but if Brennan had sabotaged the road, who knew when help would actually come? He pulled out the satellite phone. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still worked. He tried calling Sheriff Mullins again. This time, someone answered on the second ring. "Sheriff's office." "This is Jackson Cole. I need to speak to Sheriff Mullins. It's an emergency." "Mr. Cole, Sheriff Mullins has been trying to reach you. There was a tree blocking the access road. We had to bring in equipment to clear it. We're mobile again, but we're still at least 90 minutes from your location." 90 minutes might be too late. The men I told you about, they've found us. They're armed, and they're actively hunting us through the forest. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a coordinated assault. There was a pause. "Can you get to a safe location?" Jackson looked around at the dark forest, the endless snow, the temperature that was steadily dropping toward fatal. "I'm working on it." "Stay on the line. I'm patching you through to the sheriff." Static. Then Mullins's gruff voice. "Cole, where are you?" "About 2 miles northeast of my cabin, near the old fire watch tower. We escaped, but they're still searching for us." "Who are these people? Do you have names?" "Victor Brennan. He's with Apex Mining Corporation. He has at least 8 men with him, maybe more. They broke into my home and they're trying to force me to sign over mineral rights to my property." "Mineral rights? What the hell is going on up there?" Jackson took a breath. "Sheriff, my property sits on top of a rare earth mineral deposit worth over $300 million. The previous owner, Walter Harrison, discovered it years ago but never filed claims. He died before he could establish a trust to ensure the deposit benefited local communities instead of corporations. His daughter tried to finish his work and was killed 3 days ago. Her daughter Emma showed up at my cabin during the storm. She's been with me ever since, and now Brennan and Apex Mining are trying to take it all by force." Silence on the other end. Then Mullins said quietly, "Jesus Christ, 300 million? "Minimum. I've got documentation, samples, all of it. And I've already sent copies to a journalist at the Denver Post. This is going public whether Brennan likes it or not." "And these men are trying to stop you?" "They're trying to eliminate witnesses. If Emma and I disappear, they can claim they purchased the rights legally and bury the whole story." Mullins cursed. "Okay, listen carefully. I'm calling in state police. Maybe federal agents if there's jurisdiction. But that takes time. Can you hide? Stay off their radar until we get there?" Jackson looked at Emma, shivering in the darkness. "I'll try. But Sheriff, we're running out of time. It's 10 below out here. Emma's 7 years old. She can't survive a whole night in these conditions. Do what you can, Cole. We're coming as fast as possible." The line went dead. Jackson lowered the phone and met Emma's eyes. "Help's coming," he said, "but we need to stay warm until they get here." "How?" "Good question. They had no shelter. No way to build a fire without alerting Brennan's men. And the temperature was still dropping. Jackson's search and rescue training kicked in. Survival priority 1, maintain core body temperature. They needed insulation from the snow and wind. He looked around, assessing options. The fallen log they were sitting against was massive, maybe 4 feet in diameter. An old ponderosa pine that had come down years ago. The snow had drifted against it, creating a natural windbreak on one side. "We're going to build a snow cave," Jackson said. Over the next 20 minutes, working as quietly as possible, Jackson dug into the snowdrift against the log. He carved out a small chamber just big enough for the two of them to sit huddled together. He packed the walls firm, shaped them to trap heat. It wasn't much, but it would keep them warmer than sitting exposed. They crawled inside. The space was tiny, cramped, dark. But immediately the wind stopped. The temperature felt degrees warmer. Jackson pulled Emma close, wrapping his coat around both of them. "Body heat," he explained. "We'll share it. Keep each other warm." Emma pressed against him, her small body still shaking. "Jackson?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you didn't take the money." Jackson looked down at her. In the faint light filtering through the snow, he could just make out her face. "Yeah? Why?" "Because Grandpa Walter and Aunt Sarah, they believed this discovery could help people, real people, not just make rich people richer, and I think they were right." "Me too." "Do you think we'll make it? Do you think the story will get out?" Jackson thought about Melissa Grant, working in her Denver newsroom right now, verifying sources, writing the article that could change everything. He thought about Sheriff Mullins, racing up the mountain with state police. He thought about the men still searching the forest, flashlights sweeping through the darkness. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know we're going to try, and sometimes that's all you can do." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "If we do make it, what happens to me?" The question hit Jackson harder than the fall from the tower. He hadn't thought that far ahead. Emma had no family left. She'd be put into the system. Foster care, a stranger's home. Unless. "What do you want to happen?" Jackson asked carefully. Emma looked up at him. "Can I stay with you?" Jackson's throat tightened. He'd been alone for 5 years, had chosen isolation, had built walls specifically to avoid connections like this. But sitting here in a snow cave with this brave little girl who'd fought beside him, who'd trusted him, who'd refused to leave him even when it meant danger, Jackson realized those walls had already come down. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'd like that." Emma's arms tightened around him. "Promise?" "I promise. We'll figure it out. Legal stuff, custody, all of it. But if you want to stay with me, I'm not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a while, huddled together, conserving heat. Jackson could still hear voices in the distance, but they were moving away. The searchers had lost the trail. Time passed slowly. Jackson checked his watch every few minutes. 8:45, 9 o'clock, 9:15. The sheriff's 90-minute estimate would put them here around 10:30. Another hour and 15 minutes. Emma had fallen asleep against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. Jackson envied her ability to sleep through this, but kids were resilient. They adapted. They found peace in chaos. He was drifting himself, exhaustion pulling at him, when a new sound cut through the night, different from the searchers, mechanical, rhythmic. Helicopters. Jackson's eyes snapped open. He listened carefully. The sound was coming from the south, multiple aircraft by the sound of it, moving fast. He gently shook Emma awake. "Emma, wake up. Something's happening." She stirred, blinking in confusion. "What?" "Listen." The helicopter sounds grew louder, closer. Then, through the trees, Jackson saw lights. Searchlights, powerful enough to turn night into day, sweeping across the forest. And then a voice, amplified through a loudspeaker. "This is the Colorado State Police. All personnel on the ground. Identify yourselves immediately. This area is under investigation. Anyone found trespassing will be detained." Jackson's heart leapt. The cavalry had arrived. He scrambled out of the snow cave, pulling Emma with him. The helicopters were directly overhead now, maybe 3 of them, searchlights crisscrossing the forest. And on the ground, lights were approaching from multiple directions. Vehicles, lots of them. Jackson pulled out his flashlight and started signaling. SOS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, over and over. One of the helicopter searchlights swung toward them, locked on. The aircraft descended, hovering maybe 50 feet above the trees, rotor wash kicking up massive clouds of snow. A voice boomed from the helicopter's speaker. "Jackson Cole, Emma Harrison, identify yourselves." Jackson waved both arms. "Here, we're here." Stay where you are. Officers approaching your location. Within minutes, figures appeared through the trees. Men in tactical gear, but these ones had state police emblazoned across their vests. Real law enforcement, not Brennan's mercenaries. The lead officer approached with his weapon lowered but ready. Jackson Cole? That's me. This is Emma Harrison. We're the ones who called for help. The officer spoke into his radio. Subjects located, safe, proceeding with extraction. He turned back to Jackson. Are you injured? No, cold, exhausted, but we're okay. And the men who were pursuing you? Jackson pointed back toward the fire tower. Last I saw them, they were searching near the old watchtower, about half a mile that way. 8 to 10 men, led by Victor Brennan from Apex Mining. The officer nodded. We've got units converging on that location now. Let's get you two somewhere warm. They were led through the forest to a clearing where multiple vehicles had assembled. Police cruisers, state police SUVs, an ambulance. And standing beside one of the cruisers, looking both relieved and furious, was Sheriff Mullins. Cole, he said as they approached, you've had one hell of a night. You could say that. Mullins knelt in front of Emma. And you must be Emma. Are you all right, sweetheart? Emma nodded, though she was still shaking with cold. Let's get you checked out. Mullins gestured to the paramedics, who quickly wrapped both Jackson and Emma in thermal blankets and started checking vital signs. While the paramedics worked, Mullins filled Jackson in. We got your call about the tree blocking the road. Took us an hour to clear it with a chainsaw. But while we were working, we got a call from the Denver Post. Reporter named Melissa Grant. She said you'd sent her documentation about a major mineral discovery and claimed you were being hunted by corporate mercenaries. She was verifying the story and wanted to know if we could confirm an active situation. What did you tell her? I told her we had an active search and rescue operation for a missing child and were investigating reports of armed trespassers on private property. She put two and two together. Next thing I know, she's publishing a preliminary story online and tagging every state and federal agency she can think of. The Colorado Geological Survey, the EPA, the Bureau of Land Management. Even sent a draft to the governor's office. Jackson felt a weight lift from his shoulders. She published it? Went live about 40 minutes ago, created a firestorm. That's why we've got state police here instead of just county deputies. Once this became a potential federal minerals case with corporate corruption allegations, everybody wanted in. Emma looked up at Jackson, her eyes wide. Does that mean we won? Mullins smiled. Well, young lady, I wouldn't say won exactly, but it means the whole world is watching now, which makes it a lot harder for bad people to do bad things. As if on cue, radios across the clearing crackled to life. Command, this is Unit 7. We have 10 subjects in custody near the fire tower location. One of them is identifying himself as Victor Brennan, legal counsel for Apex Mining. He's demanding to speak to his attorney. Mullins grinned. Tell Unit 7 that Mr. Brennan will get his phone call after he's been processed for breaking and entering, armed trespassing, and interfering with emergency services. And remind him that everything he says will be recorded. The radio operator relayed the message. Mullins turned back to Jackson. We're going to need full statements from both of you, but that can wait until morning. Right now, let's get you somewhere with heat and beds and hot food. Jackson nodded gratefully. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him hollow and shaking. Emma had already fallen asleep again, wrapped in thermal blankets in the back of the ambulance. Sheriff, Jackson said quietly, Emma's got no family left. Her parents are dead. Her aunt died 3 days ago. What happens to her? Mullins's expression softened. Child Protective Services will need to get involved. She'll be placed in emergency foster care until a hearing can determine long-term custody. What if I want to apply for custody? Mullins raised his eyebrows. You barely know this girl. I know she's brave. I know she's smart. I know she's been through hell and still keeps fighting, and I know she doesn't deserve to be bounced around the system. It's not that simple, Cole. There are procedures, background checks, home studies, court proceedings. I know. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't let them take her away tonight. Please. Mullins studied Jackson for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. See if we can keep her with you temporarily as an emergency placement. But you'll need to meet with social workers tomorrow. And you'll need a lawyer. I'll figure it out." 2 days later, Jackson sat in a conference room at the Gilpin County Courthouse, surrounded by more lawyers than he'd seen in his entire life. On one side of the table sat representatives from Apex Mining, grim-faced and hostile. On the other side sat attorneys from the Colorado Attorney General's office, the EPA, and the Bureau of Land Management. And in the middle, looking slightly overwhelmed, sat Jackson and Emma. The meeting had been called to discuss the legal status of Walter Harrison's mineral discovery. Over the past 48 hours, geologists from the USGS had examined the samples Jackson had preserved. They'd confirmed everything. The deposit was real. The estimated value was actually higher than Walter's calculations, closer to 360 million than 310 million. And the minerals were exactly the kind the United States desperately needed for technological independence. Apex Mining was claiming they'd purchased preliminary exploration rights from Jackson under duress. Jackson's lawyers, provided free of charge by an environmental law firm that had read Melissa's article and smelled blood in the water, were arguing that no such sale had ever occurred and that Apex's entire operation constituted corporate intimidation and attempted theft. The judge presiding over the preliminary hearing, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Henderson, had ordered all parties to attempt mediation before proceeding to trial. Which is how Jackson found himself sitting across from Victor Brennan, who looked considerably less confident without 8 armed men backing him up. "Let me be clear," Judge Henderson said from the head of the table. "This case has national attention. The way it's resolved will set precedent for how mineral discoveries on private land are handled for decades to come. So I strongly encourage all parties to find a solution that serves the public interest." Brennan's lead attorney, a slick corporate type named Preston, spoke up. "Your Honor, Apex Mining has been involved in responsible mineral extraction for over 30 years. We have the infrastructure, the expertise, and the capital to properly develop this site. Mr. Cole is a former search and rescue worker with no experience in mining or land management. The logical solution is for him to accept fair market compensation and allow professionals to handle the extraction." Jackson's attorney, a fierce woman named Carmen Rodriguez, didn't miss a beat. "What my colleague fails to mention is that Apex Mining has 17 outstanding EPA violations across 4 states, has been sued 23 times for environmental damage, and currently faces 3 class action lawsuits from communities whose water supplies were contaminated by their operations. They don't want to develop this site responsibly. They want to strip mine it and leave Gilpin County with the cleanup bill." Preston's face reddened. "That's defamatory." "It's public record," Carmen cut in. "Every word." Judge Henderson held up her hand. "Enough. Mr. Cole, you haven't said much. What is it you actually want here?" Jackson looked at Emma, sitting quietly beside him with a coloring book one of the court clerks had given her. Then he looked around the room at all these lawyers and officials and corporate representatives. "Walter Harrison spent 13 years protecting this discovery," Jackson said quietly. "He died before he could see his plan through, but his intention was clear. He wanted the mineral rights held in a trust that would benefit local communities, schools, hospitals, infrastructure, jobs that don't disappear when the mine closes. His daughter Sarah tried to finish that work, and it got her killed. So that's what I want, not to sell out to the highest bidder, to honor Walter's vision." "That's very noble," Preston said with barely concealed contempt. "But perhaps impractical. How exactly do you plan to establish such a trust? Do you have the legal expertise, the geological knowledge, the business acumen to negotiate with mining companies and ensure fair extraction?" "No," Jackson admitted, "but I know people who do." Over the next hour, with Carmen's help, Jackson laid out a proposal. The mineral rights would be transferred to a newly established foundation, the Harrison Trust. The trust would be overseen by a board comprising local community representatives, environmental scientists, and economic development experts. Any mining operations would be required to meet strict environmental standards, provide jobs to local residents, and direct a significant portion of profits to community development. Several mining companies would be invited to submit bids for extraction rights, with the contract going to whoever could demonstrate the best combination of environmental responsibility and community benefit. And Jackson would serve as the trust's primary trustee, ensuring Walter's vision was protected. Brennan looked like he wanted to flip the table. This is absurd. You're talking about turning a straightforward commercial transaction into a bureaucratic nightmare. I'm talking about doing it right, Jackson said. Your way makes a few executives rich and leaves poison in the groundwater. This way builds something that lasts. Judge Henderson leaned back in her chair, studying Jackson. Mr. Cole, are you prepared to take on this responsibility? Being a trustee for a $360 million foundation is a serious undertaking. I know it is, and I'm terrified. But somebody has to do it. Might as well be the guy who's already been shot at over it. A hint of a smile crossed the judge's face. Fair point. She turned to the government attorneys. What's the state's position on this proposal? The Attorney General's representative, a young man named Marcus Chen, spoke up. The state of Colorado supports any solution that ensures responsible development and community benefit. If Mr. Cole is willing to establish a trust with proper oversight and transparency, we would support that framework. Preston started to object, but Judge Henderson cut him off. Apex Mining, you have two options. You can participate in the bidding process under Mr. Cole's proposed framework, competing fairly for the extraction rights. Or you can continue to fight this and face an FBI investigation into your activities over the past week, including breaking and entering, assault, interference with emergency services, and attempted extortion. Your choice. Brennan and Preston exchanged looks. The math was simple. They could cut their losses and try to win the contract legitimately, or they could face federal criminal charges. We'll participate in the bidding process, Preston said through gritted teeth. Excellent, Judge Henderson said. Now, there's one more matter to address. The custody of Emma Harrison. Emma looked up from her coloring book, suddenly attentive. A social worker named Patricia Green spoke up. Your Honor, Emma's situation is unusual. She has no living family. Mr. Cole has applied for emergency custody, which we've granted temporarily, but long-term placement requires a full evaluation. And what does your evaluation show? The judge asked. Patricia consulted her notes. Mr. Cole has passed initial background checks. His home is remote but adequate. He has stable income from veterans' benefits and now potentially from the trust. His primary concern is Emma's well-being, not financial gain. And most importantly, Emma has expressed a clear preference to remain with him. Judge Henderson looked at Emma. Sweetheart, is that true? Do you want to stay with Jackson? Emma nodded vigorously. Yes, he saved me. He's been taking care of me, and he promised we'd figure it out together. I see. And Mr. Cole, you're prepared to take on the responsibility of raising a 7-year-old girl? Jackson felt the weight of the question. Raising a child, him, a man who'd spent 5 years hiding from the world. But looking at Emma now, remembering how brave she'd been, how she'd refused to leave him even when it meant danger, he realized he wasn't hiding anymore. Yes, Your Honor, I am. The judge made some notes. Very well. I'm approving temporary custody for 6 months with regular check-ins from social services. At the end of that period, we'll evaluate for permanent custody or adoption. Does that work for everyone? Patricia Green nodded. Carmen Rodriguez smiled. Emma grinned so wide it lit up the room. Then we're adjourned, Judge Henderson said. And Mr. Cole, don't make me regret this decision. I won't, Your Honor, I promise. 6 months later, Jackson stood on the newly built deck of his expanded cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. The property looked different now. The cabin had been renovated and expanded, with a proper bedroom for Emma, better insulation, and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. But it was still remote, still quiet, still home. Emma was in the yard, building a snowman with 2 kids from Pinewood who'd come up for a playdate. Her laugh carried on the cold air, bright and clear, Inside, the table was covered with documents. Plans for the first Harrison Trust Community Project, a new medical clinic in Pinewood, funded by the initial payments from the mining contract. They'd selected a company called Summit Sustainable Mining, a smaller operation with a pristine environmental record and a commitment to hiring locally. Construction wouldn't begin for another year, but the geological surveys were complete. The extraction would be careful, methodical, designed to minimize environmental impact. And the profits would flow into the trust, funding schools, hospitals, job training programs, infrastructure improvements, everything Walter had dreamed of. The sound of tires on gravel made Jackson look up. Sheriff Mullins's cruiser pulled into the driveway. The sheriff got out carrying a folder. "Mullins," Jackson greeted him. "What brings you up here?" "Official business." Mullins handed him the folder. "Adoption papers, signed by Judge Henderson this morning. Emma's officially yours, Cole. Congratulations." Jackson stared at the papers, his throat tight. "It's done. It's official?" "It's official. You're a father." Jackson looked out at Emma, who was now engaged in a snowball fight with her friends, her cheeks red with cold and happiness. A father. Him. "How does it feel?" Mullins asked. "Terrifying," Jackson admitted. "And amazing." Mullins clapped him on the shoulder. "You're going to be fine. You already saved her life. Raising her will be easier than that." "I'm not so sure about that." "Well, you've got a whole town backing you now. People haven't forgotten what you did. Standing up to Apex, fighting for the community. You gave Pinewood hope again." Jackson shook his head. "I just did what Walter wanted, what was right. That's more than most people would have done." Mullins looked out at the mountains, the endless expanse of pine and stone. "You know, when you first came up here 5 years ago, people said you were running away from something. Maybe you were, but you're not running anymore." Jackson thought about that. 5 years ago, he'd come to these mountains broken, haunted by the people he couldn't save. He'd built walls, isolated himself, convinced himself that caring too much was the problem. But Emma had crashed through those walls, and in trying to protect her, he'd found what he'd been running from all along: purpose, connection, the courage to care again even when it hurt. "No," Jackson said quietly. "I'm not running anymore." That evening, after Mullins had left and Emma's friends had been picked up by their parents, Jackson and Emma sat on the deck together, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge. "Jackson," Emma said. "Yeah?" "Do you think Grandpa Walter and Aunt Sarah can see us, from wherever they are?" Jackson looked up at the vast Colorado sky, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. "I think so, and I think they're proud of you." "What about you? Are you proud of me?" Jackson pulled her close. "Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Emma said, "I'm glad the storm brought me to your cabin. I'm glad you found me." "Me too, kiddo. Me too." In the valley below, the lights of Pinewood twinkled. The town was changing, slowly but surely. New businesses were opening, funded by microloans from the Harrison Trust. The old school was being renovated. Young families were moving back, drawn by the promise of jobs and opportunity. And at the center of it all was a story that had started with a little girl lost in a blizzard and a lonely man who chose to help. Jackson thought about all the moments that had led here. Walter spending 13 years protecting his discovery. Sarah driving through a storm to finish her father's work. Emma refusing to leave Jackson's side even when it meant danger, and himself choosing to fight instead of run. All of it had mattered. All of it had led somewhere. "Emma," Jackson said, "you want to know a secret?" "What?" "When I found you in the snow that night, I was just going through the motions, surviving, not living. I'd given up on caring about anything except being left alone." "And now?" Jackson smiled. "Now I wake up every morning with a purpose, making sure you're safe, making sure Walter's dream comes true, making sure this mountain stays beautiful for the next generation. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to care again." Emma hugged him tighter. "You gave me a family." And there it was. the simple truth that had been building for 6 months. They weren't just guardian and ward, weren't just two people thrown together by circumstance. They were family, chosen, built from scratch in the crucible of survival and trust. Jackson looked out over his property, over the mountains he'd once used as a hiding place and now called home. Somewhere beneath his feet was $360 million worth of minerals. But the real treasure wasn't in the ground. It was sitting right beside him, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars. 3 years later, Jackson stood at the grand opening of the Harrison Community Center in Pinewood. The building was beautiful, modern, but designed to fit the mountain aesthetic. Inside were classrooms, a medical clinic, a job training center, and a community gathering space. Emma, now 10 years old and confident beyond her years, stood beside him on the stage as local officials gave speeches about renewal and hope and the power of one man's vision. But Jackson wasn't listening to the speeches. He was watching the crowd. Families from Pinewood and the surrounding towns. Kids who would use the new computer lab to learn skills. Elderly folks who would finally have access to quality health care. Young adults training for jobs that would keep them in the mountains they loved. This was what Walter had wanted. What Sarah had died trying to create. What Emma had helped protect. When it was Jackson's turn to speak, he kept it brief. Walter Harrison believed that the wealth under these mountains belonged to the people who lived on them. His daughter Sarah believed it too, and a brave 7-year-old girl named Emma made sure that dream survived. This center isn't just a building. It's proof that when we choose community over profit, when we choose long-term good over short-term gain, everybody wins. Walter, if you're listening, we did it. We finished what you started. The crowd erupted in applause. Emma squeezed his hand. Later, after the ceremony, after the tours and the refreshments and the endless photographs, Jackson and Emma drove back up the mountain to their cabin. The drive was familiar now, comfortable. Home. As they pulled into the driveway, Emma said, "Dad?" She'd started calling him that 6 months ago, right after the adoption was finalized. It still made Jackson's heart swell every time. "Yeah, sweetheart. Do you ever think about that night, the storm, when you found me?" "All the time." "What do you think would have happened if you hadn't come outside, if you hadn't heard me crying?" Jackson turned off the truck and looked at her seriously. "I don't know, but I do know I'm grateful I did. Because finding you, Emma, that was the moment my life started over. Everything good that's happened since, it all started with that night." Emma smiled. "Mine too." They got out of the truck and walked toward the cabin together, father and daughter, survivors and builders, two people who'd found each other in the worst storm of their lives and created something beautiful from the wreckage. Behind them, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. The deposit beneath the ground would fund good work for decades. The trust would ensure Walter's vision lived on, and Pinewood would thrive, proof that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't what we dig up from the earth. They're the connections we forge, the promises we keep, the courage to stand up when it would be easier to walk away. Jackson had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but he'd learned it, and he'd never forget. As he opened the cabin door, Emma already running ahead to tell their dog about the ceremony, Jackson paused and looked back at the mountains one more time. "Thank you, Walter," he whispered, "for trusting me with your dream, and for bringing her into my life." The wind carried his words into the gathering darkness, and somewhere in those ancient peaks, Jackson liked to think a ghost smiled and finally rested, because the work was done, the legacy was secure. And a little girl who'd once been lost in a blizzard now had a home, a father, and a future as bright as the stars beginning to emerge overhead. Some people inherit money, some people inherit land. Jackson Cole and Emma Harrison inherited something far more valuable, a mission, a purpose, a chance to prove that kindness and courage could change the world. And they'd done it, together. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories of hope, survival, and the bonds that change everything. Click to continue your journey with us And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the greatest treasures in life aren't found in the ground. They're found in the hearts of those brave enough to fight for what's right.